Hey, look out. It's Faith Talk Live. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
Hey, what a pleasure to talk to these guys. If you're watching Facebook Live or YouTube Live, we've got Phil Newton and Rich Shadden. They're the authors of Shepherding the Pastor, Help for the Early Years of Ministry. Guys, how are you?
Doing great.
Good to have you on. Yeah. It sounds like y'all are having some lovely storms coming through. Rich had to change locations because you got internet taken out.
We did, and thankfully I live close to where I work, so I was able to make that happen pretty quickly.
That's good. That's good. Well, you guys stay safe in those storms.
Yeah, I guess we should have said live from the Memphis area. How cool would that have sounded, right?
That would have been good.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well, let's talk about the book a little bit. The book is largely based on your story, both of you,
right?
Phil and Rich. Who wants to begin? Phil, you want to begin with how you guys met, and then we'll segue into the writing of the book and who it's for.
Sure, be glad to.
Yeah.
Rich and I met I think it was about 14 years ago. He was a seminary student in Memphis, and he and his wife, Christy, visited with us on a Sunday and got to know him. And shortly after that, I've had an ongoing pastoral internship where I've been training guys in the church that I pastored for 35 years, and invited Rich to be part of that. And the rest is history. We got together, built a relationship. And so we've had 14 years of deep friendship, I would say.
And Rich, what was it about Phil that drew you to him? Was it the knowledge? Was it he was shepherding you and bringing you in?
Well, I had some friends that had recommended visiting Southwoods as a church, and so we did. And then one of the things that Phil did, he may not even remember this, but I know it was a common practice of his, is he actually wrote a handwritten letter just welcoming us to Southwoods as just visiting. And that's kind of a lost art, but it meant a lot to us. And then we just continued to come back and sit under the preaching and teaching, and got to know Phil, and just thought, this is a place we want to be, and certainly wanted to be under Phil's preaching.
Yeah.
Now, Rich, when you started, now here's Phil. He's seasoned, right? I mean, he's been doing it for a while, and he knows the drill. And you're a young guy. What were some of the big things that you really picked up in the beginning? Just the practicals. I'm sure there were practical stuff too, not just deep spiritual truths, but just the practical stuffs of family and leading a church, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, just right off the bat here, one of the first things that struck me was I'll say it this way, the joyful seriousness with which the preaching of the word happened, and the congregation listening. That caught our attention because I think at the time Phil was getting near the end of Romans. And so we were walking through that together, and that was deeply impactful, just to see how the word was centering the life of that church. And then the simplicity of the ministry, but yet the deep impact it was having on people. There were plenty of ministries and trellises, if you want to use that language, that were in place, but they were all more or less designed to either feed the church, to shepherd the flock in that way with the word, or to turn the church's focus outward toward the lost. And so that simple approach to ministry just really caught my attention, and has continued to serve me today.
Phil, talk about what brought the idea for the book about, and particularly shepherding pastors, because a lot of people, those of us who just sit in the congregation, we think, oh, the pastor's got it all together. He doesn't need any help. Talk about the idea of actually pastors needing a shepherd.
Yeah, a lot of it I learned from the hard way of needing a shepherd and not always having one. Thankfully, the Lord brought some along the way. Rich began pastoring Ottoman Park Baptist, where he continues to serve, about 11 years ago. And when he was getting ready to candidate at this church, I knew it was going to be a pretty heady revitalization situation. So I just began to warn him and say, okay, you got to be ready for this, and this, and everybody's not going to like what you're doing. Everybody's not going to cooperate. And so we talked through on a lot of things. And I think I told him that after about 6 months, he was going to say, what in the world have I done? And then Rich commented later, no, it was about 6 or 8 weeks when he made that statement. So we just began this long, ongoing mentoring and deep friendship. And so about year 9 or so, a couple of years ago, Rich said, hey, we really ought to write a book about our story. And so we started talking about it, sketched out an outline, and we tweaked it, of course, but we sketched it out and said, okay, let's give it a shot. And thankfully, New Growth Press was happy to jump on board with us, along with Nine Marks Ministries is helping to sponsor the book, and it has the Nine Marks imprint on it. So we were pleased with that. Then we had to write it. So
Phil Newton and Rich Shadden together shepherding the pastor helped for the early years of ministry. You know, folks, we have a lot of pastors that listen. We, of course, have folks that are part of congregations all over Metro Atlanta. And maybe some of them are thinking, yeah, well, Rich and Phil, that's good for you guys because you started when, you know, Rich was just beginning. Rich, Phil, what about the ones that have been in the ministry for a while? And I mean, can this book help them?
Go for it.
I would say absolutely. And even for the person in the congregation who's not a pastor, because ultimately what this comes down to is it's discipleship. And Phil was, over the course of the last 11 years, discipling me in a particular way as a pastor. But I also think there are, in my case, or me as an example, there are many young men, and they have the zeal, they have the passion, they have the energy, but it needs to be tempered with some wisdom from an older, seasoned pastor. And then on the flip side of that, I would say there are so many pastors who have gone through so much and learned so much. They have much counsel to offer. They just need to be asked. And I would just say, starting from there, it's important to recognize those two realities.
Now, in the book, you guys talk about 4 key practices that'll help a pastor thrive. Kind of give us an overview of those and what's important in this.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that we stress over and over is you've got to go deep in your walk with the Lord. You're caring for souls as a pastor, but you got to care for your own soul. And this is where a mentor is around, just to remind you, point you in some areas when you find yourself straggling a bit or getting maybe just feeling under the pile of the demands of ministry and overly challenged. Then someone who's walked that path before can come along, give you a fresh perspective, let you know this is not the end of the world. You're not getting ready to get kicked out, we hope, and you've got to care for your soul and care for your family's spiritual life. So we spend a lot of time talking about that. We spend a lot of time talking about the centrality of the gospel in all that we are in our walk with the Lord, because our Christian growth or sanctification flows out of that gospel centeredness, that reality of the death and resurrection of Christ and the inworking and outworking of redemption. And then how that shows up, not just in our walk, but really shows up in our preaching and teaching. So we spend a lot of time addressing the necessity of ministry being built on the teaching and preaching of the word in the work of the Holy Spirit. Word and spirit. And I probably I've used that phrase as Rich 100 or 200 times in conversations, just as a reminder.
Phil Newton and Rich Shadden with us. Hearing your story, just the humility of Phil. You know, Phil could have just said, "Hey, Rich, Figure it out yourself. It's hard. See ya.
luck.
But he decided to humble himself and wisdom, humility, and those characteristics of God, right, of Jesus, and just lead you. And no doubt you're doing the same. What a great book, guys. Shepherding the Pastor, Help for the Early Years of Ministry. We'd love to talk to you again a few months down the road and see how people are responding to this book. Check out the book. You can get it at Amazon. You can also go to newgrowthpress.com. And real quick, do you guys have podcasts separately, together? What are you doing? Anything there?
Go get Rich.
I wish I could say I did, but no, I don't. I'm just focusing on pastoring and teaching and loving my family.
Awesome.
I have one on the back burner right now, but I've not been able to get with it. I started a new position with the Pillar Network, and so I'm pastoring pastors now regularly. So it's been a pretty fulfilling and demanding responsibility. So one of these days, I hope to get to it on doing a podcast.
Well, we hope so. We sure do. Phil and Rich, thank you so much. Check out the book. We got to take a break. We'll be right back. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
This is Faith Talk Live.
Thank you.